You may not realize it, but as you listen to that melody, an entire adventure and web of communications just occurred within your brain. While perception of music seems simple, the process is actually much more complicated than we might think. The journey begins when sound waves travel to your eardrum, triggering processes all over the brain. All of these processes happen so quickly that we think we perceive music instantaneously. But what happens after this perception? Why do we listen to music? If you're like most people, that music affected your mood just a little bit. We listen to music for a lot of different reasons: to relax while studying, to add energy to a party, or maybe to help relieve anger. Music has a powerful effect on how we feel, which is strange since there's no obvious biological or evolutionary value to explain it. So in 1999, researchers named Blood, Zatoy, Bermudez, and Evans explored the effect of dissonance on brain activity. They took musical images and played them a melody composed just for the experiment, accompanied by different chords that made it more or less dissonant, like this versus this. Increased dissonance seemed to activate areas of the brain involved with learning and memory processes, which means maybe our emotional response is related to memory and attention. Most importantly, though, the areas activated are not directly involved in perception of sound, which showed us that there are specific neural networks that help us process music emotionally. What's more interesting is that the experiences of musical amateurs and experts don't seem to be too different. In 2005, Begond and Poulin Charnot discovered that we seem to garner the ability to have intense emotional responses to music simply through normal exposure over the course of our lives, since there were little to no differences in musicians' and non-musicians' abilities to process moods of music or detect violations of norms when listening to music.
Unfortunately, however, there's still a lot of confusion and debate surrounding the concept of musical emotions, especially regarding how and why we feel them. In their 2008 review of various studies, Houston and Westphal proposed 6 mechanisms that seem to cover it all. The first is the most basic. It's called the brainstem reflex. This is music as sound at the most basic level. For example, a passage like this makes us alert and anxious, since in nature most warning calls are dissonant to easily draw attention, like this. The second is related to past, perhaps unconscious experiences. It's called evaluative conditioning. This is when we feel emotion from music because in the past it's been playing at emotional times. For example, you might feel happy whenever this song plays, even though you think it's a terrible song, because it was playing at a bar when you met the love of your life, though you don't consciously remember it. Baby, 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 oh, like baby, 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 no. Number 3 is called emotional contagion, which is how we perceive the emotional expression of music and mimic it internally, since music seems to imitate emotional speech, though often with greater intensity and variety. The fourth mechanism is visual imagery. When we listen to music, we tend to conjure up images that affect our mood. Some scenic landscapes for peaceful music, or triumph in a battle. Number 5 is episodic memory, which is our tendency to call up old memories when we hear a certain piece of music. This is always a conscious experience, since it explicitly involves memory. An example of this would be if you felt happy whenever you listened to Baby, since it caused you to recall the moment when you met the love of your life. The final mechanism is musical expectancy, which is a little more complex. It's based on perception of sound and what's appealing to the ear. There's this thing called the circle of fifths, which means that this sounds more appealing than this. Even if you're not a musician, you can hear the difference, and there's been loads of studies done on how this affects our perception of music. There was one study done by Steinbeis, Kirsch, and Sloboda in 2006 where musicians and non-musicians were played passages by Bach which had an unexpected chord, something like this. They then changed this chord to either sound more unpleasant or more pleasant. and recorded people's tension through their skin activity and reports of their subjective experience. They found that the more unexpected something was, or, in other words, the closer it was to another note on the circle of fifths, the more tension people perceived.
It seems that in general we all process music pretty similarly, and as Krutz, Ott, Teichmann, Osawa, and Vidal showed in their 2007 study, we seem to be more able to consistently process happy or peaceful music. Though we can recognize negative emotions in music, there are discrepancies from person to person about which emotion is which. And now you're probably thinking, this is all well and great, but what can we do with it? Well, in 2010, Kolsch realized that almost all of the systems we associate with the emotion are in fact activated by music, which means we could potentially use music as therapy for disorders rooted in the brain like depression or Parkinson's disease. More importantly, though you may not realize it, music is used to influence your daily life. In 2005, Rader pointed out the fact that politicians influence us by including emotion-inducing music and pictures in their ads. They increase participation and loyalty by cueing enthusiasm, and can even cause you to change your opinions by cueing a fear of response. In other words, though there's still a lot we don't understand about how music affects our brains, there's definitely a strong emotional response. So just keep right on listening.